response.
Okay, hello. Thanks for your time. I know our time is almost limited, but coming to an end. But one thing that gets to me, which is fascinating, is how we develop our expectations of students and kids in our classrooms. And how do we label them and identify them? And your story of going into that classroom at, not knowing where they were graded or what level they were at, that hit a note with me. And we've had debates and discussions about whether we should put students in classes according to their strength and their outcomes and their abilities, or whether we should just mix them up and randomly put them into classes in that way. And it gets to be quite a heated debate because there's arguments on both sides for and against putting them in those streams. And I'd just be fascinated to hear your perspective from your experience. What you think, how that works.
Yeah, I mean, other people have done quite a bit of research that shows that grouping children by attainment, they often say ability, but it's really just by what they've attained so far, is detrimental to most children. It's not necessarily detrimental to the high achievers, but they don't suffer if they're in a mixed group either, if there's a good teacher there. So it's a little more challenging for the teacher who's got to cater for that bigger diversity of students, but it's much better for the students to be in a mixed group. The students who are a little bit lower attaining at the moment can actually see where they could go, what's possible. And so I definitely would be in favour of the mixed ability groups. And there are terms that you may be familiar with that other researchers have used, like having tasks that have low floors and high ceilings. So they're easy for every child to access the task, problem solving, open-ended sorts of tasks, but they're also scope within the problem for students to do very sophisticated maths as well. So students can all do it, and there's room for them to surprise you as well. One of the things I used to do when I was teaching maths was to give the students a fair bit of autonomy about what they did. So, one of the last schools I taught at, the school had spent money buying textbooks, so I sort of was obliged to use them. But I would say to the students, well, the next couple of weeks we're going to be working on chapter whatever. I said, it's about this topic. I said, let's just have a little outline. Here are the main ideas. Now, you decide where you want to start, how many of each exercise you want to do, and as long as you can justify that to me, that's fine. I don't care how much you do. And some of the students would decide, I'm just going to do the last question in each exercise. And I'd say to them, well, why is that? And then they'd have to justify, they'd say, oh, that's where the hardest one is, so I can do that and I can do all the others. And then I'd say to them, well, how do you know it's harder? Which would make them look at another one. And so they do much more sophisticated thinking about the mathematics, because they had to do the kind of mathematics that the textbook writer actually did, thinking about the structure of problems and the sequence of understanding and so on. But they also had autonomy, and so they were much more engaged. They were making decisions for themselves, and the less confident kids would do lots of questions. The more confident ones would do fewer, and they all just felt better and more motivated about it. So those sorts of approaches are really useful, but I think having the mixture of kids is good. And just one other thing about seeing what's possible, one of the problems with teachers being in low SES schools in rural areas is that they only see students who come from disadvantaged families relatively. And so if that's where they've spent their entire career, and often if they're beginning teachers, that's obviously necessarily the case. They get sent to these remote schools and that's what they've seen. And so they never get to see what a really well-resourced, well-supported 14-year-old can do. And so that sets a ceiling on their expectations. So, yeah, which is another problem with the low SES and rural schools. Yeah, so sorry I ranted a bit.
Thank you. No, that makes good sense. Thank you for your insight on that.